Awesome, and we're live. Hello, One Love fam. My name is Jaleesa. I am One Love's social media manager, and I identify my preferred pronouns are she, her. And I'm super excited to be talking to you today. And I know I always say that when I start these lives, but if you're anything like me, then you're just a little bit obsessed with Euphoria. And for all of their faults, we actually believe that there's a lot that you can take from the relationship dynamics on the series. In fact, at One Love, we are strong proponents for analyzing relationships in the media, in pop culture, in TV shows, because the more you think about the unhealthy relationship behaviors in media that you love and consume anyway, the easier it is to see it in your real life. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation today. We're actually going to invite three really incredible student leaders on to talk about some of this season of Euphoria's unhealthiest moments. So please, yay! Lots of people are joining. Wave to me, say hello while I get our guest on. And if you're live or watching the replay, I would love for you to comment your name and what state you're from. While I get everyone on, have our first guest joining, and I'm going to invite other folks. Hi, Bridget. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I am just getting everyone else on. Give me 1 second. Getting three people on at once is kind of a chore, for me at least. Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can find Sydney. And Sydney and Jaylene, if you've already joined, you can also just request to join the live. Let's see. Oh, Sid Brown. I'm getting you on, and let's get Jaylene on. Hold on. And let's see if we can get her on. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Sydney, can I hear you say hello?
Can everybody hear me say hi?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Cool.
Good. I'm so excited. I literally emailed Sydney like 5 times. I was like, did you test your audio? Because I'm nervous. I'm so happy everyone can hear you and see your beautiful faces. We're going to be talking about some of the unhealthy relationship dynamics from Euphoria. And we're going to see how much we can cover in the next 30 minutes or so. Whatever we don't get to, maybe there's a follow-up in the future. We'll see. But we'll try and cover the mains, which are Cassie, Maddie, and Nate. Mostly we're going to be talking about Cassie and Nate's dynamic. Rue, Elliot, and Jules. Rue and Jules, and also I think there's another one. Maybe a little bit of Nate and Maddie from the beginning of the season. So actually, let's start there. There were a lot of really interesting moments that happened. Oh no, Sydney fell off. Okay, I'm going to get you back on, Sydney. But there were a lot of unhealthy moments that happened throughout the season. One of them being Nate and Maddie's dynamic, which was really interesting because they broke up from the previous season. But in the beginning of this season, it was kind of like, will they get back together? Won't they get back together? Can we start there and talk a little bit about that? How did they, from your perspective, how did you see them justifying possibly getting back together, even though they know they're no good for each other?
I think I really saw them trying to justify it with a genuine love they had for each other, despite all the violence and abuse throughout the relationship.
Gotcha. What were some of the ways that stuck out to you in particular, the unhealthy dynamics between those two, specifically Nate and Maddie?
I mean, like, just watching them kind of like the whole season, it reminded me of this thing that I learned actually in my econ course, which is like sunk cost fallacy, which is just like they were together for like so long. I forget like the exact time, but it's like they were together for like so long. And so I feel like being without each other, they were kind of like, well, like who else are we gonna be with? Like what else are we going to do? Like we've invested so much time in each, like what's the point of getting with other people? And I feel like while that is incredibly unhealthy, like I kind of understand like investing like years of like your time and like emotions in somebody, and then like not wanting to like kind of start over. So
Throw it all away.
yeah. So I think that definitely kind of added to the whole issue of them getting back together.
Definitely. And you know, I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves in just a second. That was a fun warm-up question because I realized I just slapped you guys on and didn't have you introduce yourselves at all. So, you know, just to kind of piggyback off of that, Sydney, I think that's a really great point because a lot of the times people ask us at one level, why don't people just leave or why don't they just stay? And it's not that easy. It's never that simple. Sometimes it's unhealthy actually to just, it's actually dangerous, actually, I should say, to just straight up break up with someone who's been abusive. And Nate was definitely abusive towards Maddie. And you saw that throughout season one, the way he would emotionally and physically get abusive with her. And then we see that sort of dynamic continue on, the emotional and mental abuse with Cassie, but we'll get there. But I really want to just pause for a second and have you all introduce yourselves, starting with Bridget, because she's in my top right corner.
Yeah, so my name is Bridget Fitzpatrick. I am a current sophomore at William and Mary, which is located in Williamsburg, Virginia. So, yeah.
Sydney, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So hi everybody. I'm Sydney Brownie. I'm currently a junior up here in Ithaca, New York. So definitely happy to be here and not be outside where it's I think like currently like 12. So happy to be doing this with all of you guys.
Awesome. And next, Jaylene.
I'm Jaylene Seberg. I'm currently a senior in high school at Denzel Washington School of the Arts. And I'm very excited to be here. Seems really fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. So you guys are the experts, not me. Gen Z is the expert here. I'm just going to sit back and let you guys have at it. But since we're on the topic of Nate and Maddie's relationship, let's actually segue into Nate and Cassie's dynamic, because I know that there's a little bit of controversy on whether or not they're actually a thing because of how toxic and, you know, their relationship dynamic really is. But let's actually talk a little bit about Nate and Cassie. What was some of the unhealthiness that you guys noticed with them from the get-go, and what stood out about their behaviors, really both of theirs, the most to you?
I think that the fitting question is like what was healthy, because like
yes. What was healthy there? Okay.
Like just going off of it, I mean like obviously like how like it all started like at a gas station. Like it was really I guess like predatory, and I mean like them just gaslighting like each other, like Cassie not telling Maddie about it, Nate not telling Maddie about it. It was a whole mess. And so I feel like just from the get-go, like there wasn't really anything healthy going on there. Like the only thing that I could say that happened was like good is that like when the whole thing with Cassie's family was going on, like Nate offered her a place to stay, and like even with that, like it was very kind of like inappropriate, and like the fact of like he's isolating her even further from her family. And so that was just it was a whole mess for me.
And that's a great point. I'm glad you brought up the gas station, because my understanding is she was in a vulnerable situation. For those of you who hadn't watched the show or are catching up, she was already in a very vulnerable position. Am I right? She had just had like an abortion from with her ex-boyfriend, if I'm not mistaken, and so was very like emotionally probably depleted in a very dark space to begin with. And then here comes Nate, who I'm sure looked maybe appealing to her at the time. But the reality is, it seems like maybe the power dynamics were a little off from the beginning, right? Just given where she was so shattered um, from last season.
Um,
Kind of go off of that point. I feel like Cassie and Nate's relationship really just had a lot of passion, which, you know, a lot of people think passion is really good, and it can be. But a lot of the time, when passion is the first thing that comes within a relationship, it usually fosters not a safety environment and feeling like you're always on your toes. And one scene that really sticks out to me between Cassie and Nate is that big fighting scene when they're in the bathroom. And the last line for me is something that always has stuck in my head is, you know, after the big fight, the last thing Nate said was, Cassie, I love you. And I feel like that's something One Love really talks about, um, is that just because you love somebody, it's not an excuse to then, you know, apologize and act like everything is okay for all the abuse that you just did to that person. So that scene specifically for me had a lot of context and could really, I mean, probably talk about that one scene this entire time. So
100%, and you're right. Like, there's a difference also between, you know, a healthy amount of passion in a relationship. You kind of want to feel something from that partner, but there's a difference between healthy passion and intensity. And it seems like their relationship was super intense from the start. They, you know, started, you know, getting physical really, really early. And a lot of people, like you said, Bridget, might think that, you know, being physically intimate with a partner means all these other things. Like you trust them, they trust you, and you have a foundation. But you really get to see from Euphoria that that's not always the case. And also with that scene, we talked about what you're referring to is when Nate is basically, she's threatening, right, him to tell Maddie to come clean about it. And he's saying, don't do it. No. And she decides to leave. They have this big fight, and he's yelling at her. He's more intensity, volatility. He's shouting at her. These words, by the way, intensity, volatility, One Love's 10 signs. Go check them out, guys, at joinonelove.org. Quick plug. But right before she leaves, he says, I love you, as like a last ditch effort to get her to stay. And yes, you're 100% right. Unhealthy partners do this all the time. They'll use loving words and phrases, and you know, phrases that we normally would consider words of affirmation, but in a very manipulative way. He wanted her to do what he wanted her to do, which was to stay and not say anything, keep her mouth shut. And so he said, I love you. And so you can see how in abusive relationships, these like things that are normally considered so sweet are totally twisted and skewed. But anyways, I want to get to Jaylene. I know you had something to say. I'm sorry I cut you off.
no, I actually wanted to expand on what you were saying. Following the sexual nature of the relationship, it wasn't much of a genuine relationship outside of the sexual aspect. Hence, the rest of what they would think was love, following off of the secrecy of the relationship, feeling the privacy that they had because they were hiding from everybody else, when really it was extremely manipulative, and they constantly use it against each other in a very combative way.
Yes.
Again, I wanted to acknowledge how he says I love you in like a last ditch effort to draw her back and play into his benefit. Extremely manipulative. It's very strange how in relationships where they're already unhealthy, in tense situations, they use these loving phrases as a very divisive tool to draw back into their victim to their. That's what I wanted to acknowledge.
Exactly. They're luring you back in. Just when you think you are done with them, no, they're going to say all the things you want to hear and probably have been yearning to hear from them for a long time. I wonder, just to piggyback off of what you just said about the sexual nature of the relationship and how hidden the relationship was, is hiding a relationship automatically a red flag for you guys, or is there ever a time, space, scenario where that might be appropriate? I'm just curious.
I mean, like personally, I've been like in situations where like that has been like conveyed to me, and like to me that is always a red flag. Like I don't care like how you act, like what you're saying, always a red flag for me, because like to me, like if you cannot share like who I am and like what I'm about with like the like with not only the important people in your life, but just like anybody, like a person that I'm supposed to be like in a couple with, if you are ashamed of me and like ashamed to like share me with the world, then like that isn't okay with me. Um I mean, like the only circumstance, like obviously if somebody's health or safety is at risk, I cannot understand that. But I guess like in the context like like of Euphoria, like just any instance where like you feel like you cannot share who I am with the people who mean a lot to you, like that just doesn't sit right with me in pretty much like 99.9% of circumstances.
Yeah, and I do want to just call out the only time I could think of personally is, you know, my good friend is, he's gay and he's no longer closeted, but I know for a long time he kept a lot of his relationships hush hush on the low low because of that reason. But that's the only reason I could think. And do want to call out that, if that is your situation, I could see, I mean, how isolating is it if you do have to, for that specific reason, have to keep your relationship on the low, and like you're going through all of these things with a partner that may be healthy or not, you know what I'm saying, and not being able to go to people for help. That's really unfortunate. So definitely, did either of you want to, Bridget or Jillian, want to address what Sydney said? Sorry guys, my names are like I'm losing them now because of my age. But
Oh,
did either of you want to say anything?
I definitely did.
Okay.
I generally think hiding a relationship is always a red flag, other than in queer relationships or
Very specific. Yeah.
dangerous situations for one of the partners or maybe both. But
Yeah.
it's very dangerous, not only because of the social aspect where it could mean there's not a genuine bond there because you're hiding from public, maybe out of fear of opinions, or so be it. But I think it's very dangerous because that seems, to me at least, seems like a slightly predatory behavior. It seems to me like you don't want people to know who I am interacting with in case something goes wrong that you cannot take responsibility for it. I generally think it's very scary.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well. Mhm.
or not to interrupt, I was going to say I obviously agree. And I definitely think there's a difference between hiding a relationship and then wanting to keep certain aspects of your relationship private. And I feel like there's definitely a healthy balance. Like you don't need to be telling everybody, the intimate things between you and your partner, but to share with others that, you're maybe in love or how you feel about somebody, I think is a really healthy sign that they trust you and feel safe around you. And that is just like a healthy balance. So there definitely is that difference, for sure.
Gotcha. And also, think going back to the show, I do want to transition to another question because after Lexi's play, Cassie and Nate pretty much break up. That was sort of like, it seems to be the final blow to the relationship. How could your sister, write about me? And let's unpack actually. And then he just kind of just breaks up with her, discards her. But let's unpack Lexi's play. What did you think about it? Pros and cons to writing a play about the life of your friends. What did you guys? What was your first reaction to that episode?
I thought the play was very intrusive and inappropriate and almost
Mm.
because it would be one thing if she had at some point acknowledged or asked any of the people she was depicting in the play for permission to include certain things, but at no point did she. And also in the way that she presented it and promoted and got opinions before the production, even when, like, in reference to when she was talking to Fez about it, she was very vague and almost divisive in how she shared with him the contents of it. She never fully explained what she was showing. She just gave him a very vague description of what she wanted it to be about. No, because I feel that she knew that everybody would disapprove if she was honest. Because I personally, like an example, I thought it was extremely inappropriate that she opened the play with a very vulnerable scene of Rue's dad's funeral. And from there on, it only goes down and explores into other people's vulnerable moments. I thought it was very inappropriate and intrusive and wrong.
And it seems like a lot of people agree with you in the comments. Someone's named, and excuse me if I butcher this, JBA_Nix says, hated it. She had no consent from anyone in regards to the play. Awesome. Any other thoughts?
I mean, like, I feel pretty much the same way in the respect of, like, everybody, like, at least who I talked to, like, saw it, like, as a complete serve. But it just made me, like, feel really weird and uncomfortable, because, like, if I was, like, Rue, I would feel incredibly uncomfortable with the fact that, like, that you broadcasted the death of my father and then my trauma and my issue with drugs to, like, the entire school and didn't ask me first. And so that would just make me incredibly uncomfortable. And, like, even with Cassie, like, was she acting out of pocket like the entire season? Yes. Like,
But did she deserve that, you know?
like, regardless of how, like, cruel or such she was acting, like, you don't have to, like, broadcast, like, your trauma not only as, like, her sister, but, like, the whole scene, like, on a Ferris wheel, like, from season 1. Like, no matter how upset you may be, like, at your sibling, I would not ever, like, broadcast that info out to the whole school. No, like, no matter how upset I was. And so I feel like kind of unpacking, like, that sort of trauma, like, should be done, like, in private in, like, a therapist office, or, like, at best, like, if you want to write your play, fine. Don't put it, like, in front of the entire school and like, put on blast, like, your supposed best friend and your sister, because, like, you want to unpack your trauma in a very public manner. So I just personally was not comfortable with how she went about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Bridget, did you want to say anything before I jumped in?
Yeah, I was just going to add something quick. Obviously, I completely agree. It's interesting because I think Lexi's play was a very passive way for her to get, like they were saying, her trauma, but, you know, doing things passively and almost holding this grudge for so long and finally getting it out, the much healthier way to deal with it is, like, you know, go to therapy or have an actual conversation with the person who you have a, you know, problem with, or something's on your mind about it. And then however that person reacts, you then can decide whether you want to keep engaging and being close with that person, or if you decide to, like, step away and really value your space and your energy. And if that person is not matching it, your decision, and you don't owe that person or anybody else an explanation.
Gotcha. Well,
Sorry.
personally, okay, I can see I'm going to be the problematic person on this panel, the one love person. You know, I'm actually neither here or there with the play, because I actually yes, I am. I actually 100% agree with you. As a spectator, it was entertaining, and it was like you said, Bridget, like a complete serve. But if I were to put myself in their shoes, I would be pissed. Like, without a doubt, if you had put all of my issues, personal issues that you know intimately because you're my friend, on blast in a play, and everyone kind of knows who you're talking about, it's like, come on. On the other hand, the other part of me is just like, oh, but she's an artiste and she's, you know, whatever. But in reality, I would be really hurt. And it's interesting because how they treated it in the Euphoria universe, because yes, we saw the different reactions. You had Cassie, who had the most, I think, maybe extreme reaction. But then they had Rue, who actually had a positive response to the play, seeing her life in that way. And I thought that was really interesting because I would have thought, like you guys, especially you, Sydney, if I were a person struggling with addiction and I saw all the sources of my addiction, hello, triggered. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, I respect the writers, but I just don't know how realistic that would be, to your points, in real life. You know what I'm saying? So awesome. Thank you guys so much. Was there anything else that stood out to you about the play in particular? At the end, Nate does, and although he's not our favorite person here at One Love, not by any means, but he does have a point about his scene, the scene where they speculate about his sexuality. And personally, I did think that was very unhealthy because that's so personal. And that, who knows what the response could have been to that or will be in the next season. But yeah. I'm just wondering what else stood out to you guys about the play? The unhealthiness of it.
First, I would like to acknowledge, yes, the scene with the football locker room scene. That scene was hilarious, actually, to me.
Okay.
It was extremely inappropriate, as was most of the stuff in the play. Also, in the context of it being a high school production. But passing that, it was very strange. I understand that scene came from Lexi being present during the conversation between Cassie and Maddie in the previous season, where Maddie had found pictures of men genitalia in Nate's phone. I understand that came from there, but generally, that conversation, they had dismissed it after that and never confirmed or revisited that concept until now, and that was an extremely inappropriate way to approach it. And while we're still on the topic of Lexi's play, I personally think it was extremely strange that Lexi passed off all the scenes and moments that she shared as her trauma. I understand some of them stemmed insecurities in her, in where she is showing Cassie going through puberty and gaining boobs. But aside from that, she showed their personal lives and passed it off as her story and her trauma, that it spurred something in her life, when really she was more of a spectator in those moments, and it generally never affected her. Like, even outside of the moments that spurred her or her own insecurities, and outside of the moments between her and Rue that affected their friendship. But there were a lot of scenes where she just included messy moments for other characters that generally had no business being present in that story or affecting her in any way for her to pass off as her story.
Gotcha. That's interesting. I did not think about that at all. That this whole show, technically about her, is about all the people around her.
It off as her story of friendship with Rue. Yeah.
Yeah. It was that and some. What do you guys think will be the fallout, or will there be fallout in season 3? What do you think? I mean, we've already seen, she pretty much Cassie kind of outed herself to the entire school, which resulted in her and Maddie getting into a physical altercation. Do you guys foresee any other fallout, as a result of the play?
I mean, like, speaking from Lexi's perspective, I would feel absolutely horrible just because she knows how Nate is, and she knows how Cassie is, so she should know at this point that Nate and Cassie, even if they're currently over, they aren't really over. And so as a sister, you just kind of you triggered your sister's boyfriend to the point where he's going to lash out, and this time it is going to be at your sister. And so if I were her, I would feel really bad that I kind of is he responsible for his own actions? Of course,
totally.
I would feel bad that I kind of made I put all of that on blast and indirectly made things worse, because that treatment isn't over anytime soon. But like one scene that that stood out to me was at the very end in the bathroom when Maddie was like I forget the exact words, but it was like this is only the beginning, which
Yes.
made me kind of think about like their friendship, in terms of like, are they gonna be okay? Like personally, I think that they're not gonna be friends, but like they're not ever gonna talk again, because like Maddie kind of understands what Cassie is currently going through, but I feel like whereas like she's done with like Nate, I feel like that comment is kind of her saying like, you're gonna be like with Nate and I'm not gonna help you, which came off to me as like kind of cruel, but at the same point, like obviously what Cassie did like was messed up, and like she may want like to inflict some sort of pain, but I feel like you know how Nate is, and like you're gonna let like what who used to be like your best friend go through that, like that I just kind of found interesting, and like I'm wondering like how that's gonna end up in season 3.
That there's so much to unpack there, about what you just said and about them not truly being over, because we actually saw that with Nate and Maddie, right? We started this conversation. Well, it was like, will they, won't they? Will they, won't they? You know what I'm saying? It's never truly over sometime, or it takes a long time for an abusive relationship to truly end. For those of you who don't know, it takes about 7 times for someone to leave an abusive partner before they leave them for good. And that's just because cycle of abuse and all of the things that, you know, abusive partners do to like reel you back in. And it's just very complicated to try and leave an abusive partner. And we kind of see that a little bit happening here. And you're so right. Like, yes, you know, temporarily Lexi might feel good about herself for putting everyone on blast who she's ever wanted to, but she does not consider the repercussions. I think she doesn't fully think through what that could look like for everyone around her, including her sister who's with Nate, the angry, you know, abusive boyfriend. So definitely a great, great point to unpack. And it is interesting that, you know, it's kind for me, it's a little bit of foreshadowing there with what Maddie says to Cassie, like this is only the beginning. And at first I was like, what is she exactly saying? But I think it is about that relationship, and she's really foreshadowing how topsy-turvy it's probably going to be moving forward in the next season. We'll probably see more of that, I hope, I think. And you know, you're so right about her totally washing her hands with Cassie also. Like, you know, you did this, I got the you made your bed, now lie in it sort of vibe from her. Bridget, did you want to say something? I've been chatting too long.
No, no, you're all good. I was
Okay.
thinking back to the bathroom specifically, something that comes like a scene that was really intriguing for me was actually before she barged in, is when she went to the bathroom and she was just staring in the mirror and, you know, was crying, obviously super upset, but almost like forcing this smile. And it actually reminded me of a film, a certain scene in like I, Tonya, if anybody has ever seen that.
Yes.
But for me, why it was so intriguing is because, to kind of go along with the foreshadowing, if her and Nate's relationship is going to continue and the cycle of abuse is going to continue, then she is going to then also continue that, you know, everything's okay and we're happy and like we're in love. And it's almost like her looking at trying to almost psych herself out that this is all normal and that she's going to be okay and she can ignore everything her sister just put on stage. But I think it would be interesting to see next season whether Cassie decides to take the things that she saw in the play and maybe, you know, learn from it, or whether she'll kind of, you know, play into that aspect of, you know, looking in the mirror and forcing everything to be right because she wants to be with Nate and she thinks she's in love with Nate. That sort of aspect. But yeah, that scene was super intriguing for me, and interesting.
Very, very interesting. And that's such a great point. Thank you for making it, by the way. Another thing I wanted to get into, we're already over the 30-minute mark, and I don't want to keep you guys here too long or make this video too long. So I really wanted to get into Elliot, Rue, and Jules' dynamic. What did you guys think about that relationship trio?
I thought that Elliot. Okay, before I get into that, I'm gonna make a slight comparison. I just want to see if anybody agrees. I think Elliot, in some ways, is just as bad as Nate. Obviously, not as abuse,
Hmm.
but in terms of manipulation, Elliot is a very evil character. He,
Oh.
his presence served as purely as conflict between Rue and Jules, and from the beginning of, like, as soon as he met all of Rue and Jules both, he was immediately preying on their relationship. He was introduced to Jules as Rue's girlfriend. He was very honest about his feelings towards Rue and even acted on his feelings towards Jules later on. But from throughout that whole relationship, I thought he was very predatory and manipulative between the two of them. He would, he acknowledged, let me phrase this correctly. He watched and observed their faults in both individually and in their relationship. He would play into Rue lying to Jules and then comfort Jules when things came out and she was obviously upset and vulnerable. He also like would set up certain situations. He knew Rue was actively still using drugs and knew when she was high or not, and also knew that she was an abuser. And still, in that specific scene where he says, "Let's go get drinks," knowing he has a substance abuser in the presence, in a moment where he recognized that Jules was feeling very excited and would not think twice about it. And I think that whole scene was like a very deliberate action and kind of a setup. That's just the things I noticed with Elliot, but I think he was a very manipulative character.
So while Nate's behavior is super overt, you think I'm sorry, uh, Elliot is actually just as bad, or at least just as manipulative, but in his own way, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone else want to talk a little bit about that dynamic?
I just wanted to like point out something that maybe not something about the dynamic, but a specific line he said. I believe it was after he played the guitar, and I think said something like, "Oh, still be friends," and he was like, "Well, you know, I thought we were bad for each other." And for me, that was a really interesting perspective, just about unhealthy relationships in general, and kind of going back to an earlier topic we briefly touched on, that you know you can still love somebody and care about them, but know that they're not the best for you. And that's why it's really hard to come out of unhealthy relationships, because, you know, like we've been talking about, we let love be the sole reason why we stay in a relationship. But, you know, love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. And if you're having Elliot, you know, not supporting him in, or supporting her in a way that's going to help her move past her addiction and whatnot, then you know he's not really beneficial in her life. And I think it's honestly at the end, after, it's unfortunate, you know, after she pretty much like this big episode and basically has to end up going back to rehab. It's unfortunate it happened after that, but he realizes that he's not a good influence on her and their relationship is super unhealthy. And that's kind of where I give him a little bit of credit, and their relationship a little bit of credit, that they were able to step back and say, this isn't good for either one of us. And I think that's the difference between Nate and Elliot. If there's anything, that I think he became aware of how unhealthy he was, but I just don't think Nate really,
Nate is fully
yeah, exactly.
aware of how toxic he is. Really great perspectives, both of you. Thank you. Okay, Sydney, we know you got something to say, so you might as well say it.
That Nate is 110% like aware of
Okay.
everything he's doing. Because like I feel like Nate's just like been playing chess like throughout these two seasons, like just to get exactly what he wants. Like from episode like I forget what episode that
Mm-hmm.
that that my damn disc. But like since then, he has been like extending like this whole game, and like Nate is exactly aware of every single unhealthy thing that he does just for his own benefit. Now, I would also say Elliot incredibly unhealthy, because I feel like whereas Rue and Jules, like, they obviously like didn't get together at the start of the season for like the right reasons. I would say like Elliot certainly didn't help, because correct me if I'm wrong, like Rue was already using before she met Elliot, and like he like whereas like Rue was already like using before she met Elliot, I feel like whereas Elliot didn't stop her addiction until like episode, I think like 5 or 6, like he certainly didn't help it in the fact of like he got her like her product, like he gave her like a space to use, and like he didn't tell anybody until like he felt bad like with Jules and everything. um and so I feel like whereas Elliot and Nate are just as like unhealthy in terms of like their tactics, I would say like at least Elliot has like a semblance of a conscience in the fact of like in the end, like if we're going to compare like end of season, in the end, like Elliot told Jules that Rue was using, like Elliot was at the intervention with Rue and her family, and like Elliot is like still trying to be in Rue's life in like a healthy way, whereas like with Nate, like sure he turned in his dad to like the cops, but I feel like that at least part of that was like a Nate thing rather than like being a good person thing, if that makes sense. Like Nate
Oh yeah,
did
I
that
see.
partly because like yes his father like did these horrible things, but also like just for kind of the self-satisfaction of like I was the one who took down my father and like gotcha for like 18 years of trauma. And so I feel like whereas both of them are by no means good people, I
No.
appreciate Elliot's self-awareness and like attempt to like kind of like solve, not like solve, like remedy partially what he did, as opposed to like Nate, who like started it in self-interest and like ended in self-interest, even if he like did good things along the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Neither one of them are healthy, but I think that the difference is Elliot is messy and unhealthy, and in the end, he's like, "Oh, actually, this has gone too far." Whereas Nate is abusive, and even the tactics he used to make that happen were not okay. I'm talking about the scene when he shows up, in front of Maddie with a firearm. Very, very scary. I'm sure she was terrified. That is a very terrifying thing. By the way, for anyone who's watching, if you are in a relationship, an abusive relationship where a firearm is present, that is a very, very dangerous situation. And if you can get help, please do it as soon as possible, because it just is not a good mix, a volatile person with a firearm. So that's a great point. And I'm so glad we're talking about this. And also, just to kind of cap this off, that point we made earlier, Bridget, about people, loving each other, but maybe not being good for each other right now. I think that we also see that between Rue and Jules. Jules says, "I love you, Rue," like sometime after the play. And then Rue, kisses her on the head and walks away. And I think that's because she realizes that no matter how much you love someone, if it's not meant for you right now, it's not meant for you right now. It's just not the case. And right now, Rue's in recovery and needs to focus on that and not a relationship. And I also think something that's interesting about their relationship is a little bit in the earlier seasons, we don't really need to get into it, but some of the codependence there. I know Rue in the past has said, how Jules is the reason she's sober. And, that can put a little bit of unnecessary pressure on another person, when it comes to your addiction. So that's not the healthiest thing either. But one thing I really wanted to touch on before we have to go is Rue and Gia's relationship. We see a little bit more of Gia in this season, and I wanted you guys to have a chance to sort of talk a little bit about, you know, the in that scenario, because of her addiction, Rue is the unhealthy party here. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, the effects of her behavior on Gia. And you know,
Mm.
can she be forgiven? Should she be forgiven,
Yeah, I
We're
thought,
getting a lot of hearts. Yay. Thank you guys. Sorry, Jalen, go ahead.
yes, it's fine. I personally think the Rue and Gia's relationship is salvageable to some extent. It'll never be as healthy as it could have been had Gia not had to witness a lot of what Rue went through.
Oh, that trauma.
Yeah, because it was a very traumatizing situation, especially since it was going on since Gia was so young. Um, and how it played into their relationship that even Gia has with their own mother outside of Rue because of Rue's actions. Um, but it's genuinely very terrifying and traumatizing, and I'm really excited they started to explore that this season. I really wish they had done more, but having Ali start to acknowledge and positively enforce and support Gia and not force her to forgive Rue was a beautiful thing to me. That she did it, that he didn't say, "Oh, well, she's going through it. It's hard for her. We should be there for her." He comforted her and made sure she was okay and having her own emotions and thought process throughout the healing process.
Definitely. Really great point. Thank you so much, Jaylene. Did anyone else want to add on to that before we go?
Yeah, I mean, like, I felt the exact same way in the fact of like in instances of like where you have like say a friend or like a loved one in general, like in that situation, you may feel like, oh, like they're going through stuff, like I can't get like that with them right now. Like it is completely valid, like to be angry, like with your sister, even if she's going through like abuse issues. Like it is completely fine and like valid to be upset. And I think like that having that discussion with Ali was important because like it kind of like showed her like it's okay for you to be angry. It's just like make sure to kind of like don't suppress it, because I feel like a lot through both season 1 and 2 we've kind of like seen the effects of like her having to like push to the side like all of her emotions, like
Mm-hmm.
says like she's failing in like school. And I think like something, it was like quick, but I think like that by her saying that, it kind of shows like the not only emotional implications like of Rue's actions on her family, but like it's not all about her all the time. And like I think that kind of extending it out, like both for Gia and the audience to see like, hey, it's not like just about like Rue and Jules and the people at like at I almost said Euphoria High, sorry, at East Highland. It's not just about them. Like with every person who has like these kinds of substance abuse issues, like there's a family behind them, and like there's a whole community who like is affected by them, but like it's completely valid like for them to be upset as well as like help them and like want to contribute to like their betterment and like overall recovery. So yeah.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. We have Bridget, Sydney, and Jaylene on today talking a little bit about Euphoria. And guys, we covered a lot of ground in less than an hour, so thank you. One thing I just wanted to call out before we leave, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, because we did talk a lot about abusive relationships during this call, please reach out for help. You can go to One Love's real-time resources on our website at joinonelove.org, or you could call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and that number is 1-800-799-7233. Please get help if you need it. Also, I did want to just call out I know this is a weird transition. Sorry. Just bear with me. If you would like to support One Love, take action, oh dog in the background, and your community for healthy relationships, you can join our new Move for One Love initiative, Move for Love initiative. Go to our website to learn more and sign up yourself or a team. And you can move, walk, run, dance a mile, and collectively help us move 1,000,000 miles. In this spring. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm going to end it here. Bye.
Yeah.
Ready?
Thank you.